So good evening, everyone. Uh, I'm Yogesh Joshi, and I welcome you all to today's Institute of South Asian Studies seminar on a very relevant uh, topic by our senior visiting fellow, Dr. Ren Yuanze, which explores China's evolving policy towards the small states in the Indian Ocean region. Uh, Dr. Ren Yuanze is a senior visiting researcher at ISAS and is an associate professor at the Department of Diplomacy and Foreign Affairs Management, China's Foreign Affairs University. He's also the deputy director for the Center for Protecting China's Overseas Interests and Secretary General of the Center for Strategic and Peace Studies at the China Foreign Affairs University. Dr. Ren has published a lot on topics concerning China's policy in the Indian Ocean. And looking at China's astronomical rise, both in terms of its economic power, but also its military power, today China is more and more looking towards the Indian Ocean region. For a long time, China was encircled, or at least thought to be encircled, by the first island chain and the second island chain. But Chinese strategists like Admiral Liu Huaking have been talking about expanding Chinese maritime interests, not only in the Pacific, but also in the Indian Ocean region. And I think the time has come where the whole world has to stand up and take notice of China's outreach in the Indian Ocean. And this is relevant, particularly in a place like ours in Singapore, which stands astride the Indian Ocean. Without much ado, I would now urge Dr. Ren to explicate on his paper today for around 40 minutes, 35 to 40 minutes, and then we have an hour of discussion, which I think would be further stimulating and provide Dr. Ren further insights into his own work. So thanks everyone to have come, and over to you, Dr. Ren.
Thank you, Yogesh. It's my great pleasure and sincere gratitude to be here, give this talk. It's really like talk in front of families. I have been here for 3 months. It's my homework to finish this South Asian scan, and which attract me to this stimulating area of China foreign policy. Just as Yogesh has introduced, I am now working in China Foreign Policy University, which is the university with Chinese Foreign Ministry. So most of my work back to Beijing is to observe the development of Chinese foreign policy. I have engaged with at least 2 textbooks. One is in 2014, another is which I finished this year. It's a textbook for all the Chinese government officials to read on China foreign policy. And I have a very, very deep impression comparing with the 2. Actually, that's a lot of new things come up in the past 6 years after the 18th Party Congress. And there are many new ideas, new concepts, new diplomatic thoughts. We call it a Xi Jinping diplomatic thoughts, which we are all learning nowadays back to China. Actually, my part in this textbook is write about China's partnership network. We call it a global partnership network, which is a big expansion of China's previous focus of major powers. In the past, when we talk about China foreign policy, we all mention China, US, China, EU. That's in China almost 80% of the researchers covers 2 areas. Back to China also has a lot of lectures on China, US, because that's why they invited me. That's the hottest topic. However, in this latest research and also my textbook writing, I slightly have a very deep impression China's foreign policy has changed, at least evolved quite a lot in the past 6 years. especially after the promotion, we inaugurated the BRI in 2013. Until now, 6 years. Small states alongside the BRI become more and more important. And we set up, in China, we set up a lot of research institutes covering regional studies and even some small states. That's a new phenomenon. Comparing with what I know in the past, it's very new. It's very new. And come to essays, I talked with Prof. Raja Mohan, what I should write. Because I I read his book, his classic book, Samandra Mason, China, India, rivalries in the Indo-Pacific, quite a long time. And it's very well known. It has been already translated into Chinese. We all know, we all read this book and feel it's very stimulating to understand the current big power game in the Indian Ocean. And this book was published in 2012, I think. But after that, many things happened. So Prof. Raja, encouraged me, to explore China's relations with those small states in the Indian Ocean region. And I also feel it's very interesting and very inspiring to expand my mindset of understanding on China foreign policy. So after the busy 3 months of reviewing, writing, I have finished 2/3 of my scan on this topic, and today I would like to report some of my key findings, and I believe it will be interest for our audience. I will divide my presentation into 4 parts. The first, I will briefly identify small states in China's new diplomatic layout. I use the word new diplomatic layout because it's quite new, just as I described to you, especially for the small states. Now they are become more and more relevant and significant in China's diplomatic layout. Why they are important, how China perceive the strategic, significance of those small states in the Indian Ocean region. That is my first part. Secondly, I will give a, detailed narrative of China's way of engagement with those small states. Thirdly, what it means for, the region. And lastly, but not least, I will give my conclusion and look to the future. What will be the situation in this region? First, I will identify small state in China new diplomatic layout. Actually, I prepare more slides thanks to my friend, Christina's suggestion. I condense it and try to make it more focus. Nowadays, China's, we call it major countries diplomacy, have actually for 4 parts. The first part, of course, is China's relationship with major countries. It's still very, very important. China-US is the key of the keys. So we always emphasize we want to build a framework of major country relations characterized by overall stability and balanced development. When we refer to the major country China's relation with major country is mainly 3 parts. One is China-US, another China-EU, and the third China-Russia. That is the first category. Second is forging a friendship and partnership with our neighbors. There is a very big difference after the 18th Commonwealth comparing with the previous period is the importance of neighborhood. In 2013, the Communist Party had the first time had the special conference on neighborhood diplomacy. That's the first after founding of PRC. That shows how important those neighborhood is. We have some new concept to define China relations with the neighborhoods. And thirdly, China relation with developing countries. Because although there are a lot of debate, internationally, whether China is still a developing country, but at least for most of the Chinese, we still believe we are developing countries. We belong to the developing countries, and we would like to strengthen our unity and cooperation with developing countries. And thirdly is our big mindset to to build a community of shared future for mankind. The instrument to realize this mindset is BRI, which is very, very important. So for BRI, I think all of you has been quite familiar with this initiative. We call it an initiative, not a strategy. But for the a lot of observers overseas, they always say, okay, it's a Chinese strategy, it's Chinese grand strategy, something like that. But we officially use it, the initiative to describe the Chinese BRI. It's very interesting to observe the involvement of BRI from OBOR to BRI. Because at first we use OBOR, it's an official translation of 一带一路. That's a direct translation. But then we use BRI. Because there are not only one belt, one road. There are so many belts, so many roads. And even our outreach, to Mexico. When I went to Mexico to talk with my Mexico friends, I said, okay, we are not part of your old Silk Road. But I said, oh no, we are not one belt, one road. We are Belt Road initiative. As long as you believe in this concept, you could be a partner of China's BRI. And for those Indian region small states, they are all engaged with this BRI initiative. That shows their importance and shows how many, strategic value we have attached to those small states. Generally speaking, there are 4, points I would like to elaborate a little more on why are those small states important for China. First, I think I will use 4 small states. That means Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mauritius, and Seychelles. I will not give other cases because at first I talked with Professor Raja. I said, okay, Bangladesh will be a good case. I know Bangladesh is too big. It's not a small state, Indian Ocean. So I just use the 4 cases and to elaborate my argument. The first, they are very critical to protect our sea line of communication. Last year, China's crude oil overseas reliance exceed 70%, and the natural gas reliance reach 45.3%. That's quite a lot. High dependent on the overseas natural resources. Therefore, how to protect the sea line of communication is very, very critical to China's national interest. In the Chinese academic community, we always debate about a so-called Malacca, the Malacca dilemma. That's a choke point, and very determined for China's, import of those energies. And that's why China's PLA Navy also extend our overreach to the Indian Ocean in order to protect the sea line communication and guarantee the smooth flow of goods and resources from South China Sea through Malacca Strait across the Indian Ocean and to a region of the vital resources. So this line is very, very important, very critical. And at least currently, I think China's PLA Navy has its footprints in this line in order to protect this critical, gateway for China's energy import. So that's my first point, why they are important. Second, I think those small states are very important to demonstrate China's amicable political will. I will give you 3 examples. The first is this ALRA, a Indian Ocean Region Association, which China is play a role as an observer, and also we attach a good importance to this association. And all those 4 countries are members of association. China believes if we have a better relationship with those countries, it will help facilitate China's reach to this regional organization. And second, for Seychelles, Mauritius, Maldives, they are all members of those alliance of small states, small island states, which is a critical role player in climate change. Climate change is also, China's very, China with great interests and importance to cooperate with those countries in climate change in order to extract concessions and benefits from developed countries in general, especially U.S. In Obama era, China have very good cooperation with U.S. on climate change, but nowadays, as Trump make American great again, American first, and it's very hard to cooperate with developed countries like U.S. on climate change. So those small states association is a good, natural partner for China to cooperate on, climate change issues. And thirdly, I think since those countries all parts of BRI, China's smooth relationship with them, and China's successful projects construction in those countries will be very symbolic, to show the success of BRI and to show the importance of strategic synergy between China and those countries along the BRI. So we really hope to make our, projects in those countries very successful. And for the Colombo port city in Sri Lanka, Hambantota port, we regard it as a flagship project for China to cooperate with the BRI countries. Therefore, I think, at least from these 3 aspects, China's successful and amicable relationship with those countries could show China's good political will. Thirdly, I think it's important to explore new partners in achieving China's, long-term strategic objective of maritime power. Maritime power is, one of my takeaway from the 18th Party Congress in 2012. That's the first time that Chinese Communist Party publicly declared that China's objective is to become a strong, great maritime power. We call it 海洋强国. In the past, China looked to the land. But after the Party Congress, we turn our eyes to the maritime domain. And President Xi assumed this notion and elaborated on many different occasions. So since those 4 countries are all maritime countries, so it's important for China to, establish a closer partnership with them to show our will in maritime domain. For example, we establish a blue partnership, with Seychelles. Some of my friends ask me, what is blue partnership? That's quite a new notion that China government used in the past 2 years. That means China wants to cooperate with those maritime cultures in the areas of, illegal fishing, overfishing, maritime litter, protection of maritime biodiversity, and also, of course, very important to cooperate on blue economy. Therefore, we regard those countries as our, blue partnership. And in building a maritime power, the blue partnership is very important, both from economic point of view, from non-traditional point of view, and even from a traditional political point of view. They are all very important. So I think China's engagement with those countries are very comprehensive and diversified. That's an important way for China to, realize our maritime power objective. Fourthly, of course, I think it's a good balance against our major powers, other major powers. I refer to, U.S., India, because just as Yogesh introduced, in his welcome remarks, China is a newcomer, in the Indian Ocean. General Liu Huaqiu, talk about China's maritime strategy in the 1990s. At that time, China gradually know the importance of ocean, in the ocean. So he proposed we should have an aircraft carrier, upgrade our navy, something like that. But it still takes a very long time for China to know about that. When we talk about China maritime security, usually we only refer to the Asian Pacific region. The Pacific Ocean is very, very important. However, as China, try to outreach to the other regions alongside of the BRI, Indian Ocean becomes very, very critical. And of course, those small countries, there's 4 small countries, they are regarded by U.S., India as critical partner in the so-called Indo-Pacific Concept, the new Indo-Pacific Concept. For China's perspective, to have a closer relationship with those countries, could balance or play a very leverage against the Indo-Pacific Concept, which Chinese believe, it's all the quadrilateral, but China believe it has been revived to encircle a rising power, China. So we have very negative analysis of Indo-Pacific strategy. And so we want to alienate those small states from the concept, because we believe it's a loophole in the Western encirclement. And either it's first island chain or second island chain. Those small states are all very critical. And also there are some other regional cooperations China is not included. For example, the AAGC, Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, which those countries are all part of that. In the most of Chinese perspective, this AAGC is also a competing mechanism against China's BRI. And Modi's Saiga view is also, for China's take, is not very positive. Therefore, China's closer relationship with those countries could relieve some pressure from those blocks, the so-called blocks of like-minded countries, which China is not part of it. So these 4 aspects, I think, is what China's thinking of, get closer to those small island countries. In this big background, how China do, what China has already been done. That's my second part, is the evolving patterns of engagement. I will touch upon it from political, security, people to people, different aspects. Actually, I'll do a very detailed chronological review of China's engagement with those countries. Actually, it's not only the past 6 years, it's from the establishment of diplomatic relations. You can see from this detailed picture. For China, Sri Lanka, we established our diplomatic relations in 1957. Since then, we have quite a lot of exchanges. It's my calculation is ministerial level and above. So many. So I won't go in details. And Mauritius is also the same. After we founded the established diplomatic relation in 1972, we have many exchanges. So actually, it's not the undiscovered shore. I think we have discovered quite a lot, but the international community did not pay attention to it. And after the BRI, we gradually began to realize the importance of those small states. And for Sri Lanka, I just give one case. For Sri Lanka, you can see that we have many exchanges in the past past 6 years. Yes, after the 18th Party Congress, many exchanges from the ministerial level, head of the states, and totally around 20 times. And with Mauritius, with Seychelles, it's also it's booming. Political engagement. And President Xi has visited 3 small states, not including Seychelles, but Seychelles President has visited China last year. Danny Foucault, he visited last year just before the China-African Cooperation Forum last September. President Xi met with him. We have signed a lot of agreements during this visit. But President Xi Jinping has visited Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Mauritius. Economic engagement is also quite comprehensive. Quite comprehensive. With respect to trade, China is one of the top sources of imports for all these countries. China is the largest for Sri Lanka, Mauritius, third largest for Maldives. And it's important to know that China and Mauritius will sign a free trade agreement just 2 weeks ago. That's the first free trade agreement China signed with an African country. So we want to make it very symbolic for trying to reach other countries in Africa. And also China is discussing with Sri Lanka on our free trade. Maldives is also, so we have so many big projects in those countries. Maldives, in Sri Lanka, in Mauritius, and also in Seychelles. Sorry, I cannot make it bigger. If you like, I'll put it in my scan. Very detailed. And Sri Lanka and Maldives are among the first group of countries signing the BRI agreement with China. And during President Xi's visit to Africa, last July, Mauritius and Seychelles also reached agreement with China on joining the BRI as soon as possible. So in the framework of BRI, China's economic engagement with those small states has developed quite a lot. Thirdly is military and security engagement. Honestly speaking, I think military interactions between China and among China and those small states are not remain limited, especially in comparison with India's engagement on this front. And China-Sri Lanka mil-to-mil relations is quite good, have developed quite a lot, and especially China sell a lot of arms to Sri Lanka, including some small arms, ammunition, landmines, naval vessels, aircraft, and especially during the Sri Lanka Civil War time. They help Sri Lanka a lot. And in the framework of BRI, military is also part of it. During a latest interview for China's military attaché in Sri Lanka, he publicly mentioned that China military attaché will be strengthened with Sri Lanka, and China want to boost the the development of BRI initiative strengthens the pragmatic cooperation between the two countries and the two militaries. So we can see BRI is quite comprehensive. It's not only limited to economic, but the military would also be an important part. You can see in the future, I believe China military exchanges will be more often with those small states. Last but not least, cultural and people-to-people relationship is also important. And China has established, 2 Confucius institutes and 2 Confucius classes in Sri Lanka. And now we are working with Maldives to open the first China Study Center in Vela Academy. And China, on 2015, China set up our first Confucius class in Seychelles. And it has already been updated to Confucius Institute. And we started the first Confucius Institute in Mauritius in December 2016. And we provide a lot of scholarship to students, the young people from those countries. In my university, I'm host them, because we have many exchange programs with those small states. And also tourism will be a very, very important aspect of cooperation between China with those small states, and it's also, especially from those small states' perspective, to receive more Chinese tourists will be very important, very important. For Sri Lanka last year, it's around 265. It's around 200,000. 300,000 tourists come to Sri Lanka, last year. But this year, because of those terrorist attacks, it will be only half. And to Maldives, they have a very ambitious picture. In 2023, Maldives seek more direct flight to China to attract up to 1 million tourists annually. That's a very ambitious picture. But I believe, if we work together closely, it's possible it can be realized. And I give proposal to my university, also to foreign ministry, in the future, China's engagements with those countries should, quite focus on tourism, especially for Sri Lanka. I think now if we want to help Sri Lanka to recover from the economy and after the terrorist attack, tourism would be a, good aspect to cooperate. Here, after all those elaboration, I make this table, and how can we evaluate the strategic value of those 4, island states, because they are different in the Chinese diplomatic layout. And I just, for Sri Lanka, it's a strategic cooperative partnership. We in the a big picture, a network of China partnerships, we have different layers. The top layer is strategic partnership. Sri Lanka belong to the strategic partnership. For Maldives, we established those so-called future-oriented, all-round, friendly, and cooperative partner. So that's a second tier. And for Mauritius, we have those so-called new cooperative partner. And for Seychelles, blue partner. That's our definition for the partnerships with those small countries. And in terms of the protection of the slog, political interest, economic cooperation, or balancing against the major countries, Sri Lanka are very high, very important. And for Maldives, it's important in the choke point in this sea line communication. And politically, it's medium, economical medium, and balancing. The effect of balancing against major countries is also medium. For Mauritius, I think Mauritius and Seychelles, they belong to the third tier. Their importance of safeguarding the slogs is medium. The political, impact It's, for Mauritius media, for Seychelles low economic is not very significant. For balancing, I think it's a quite limited role to play for those 4 countries. So that's my personal understanding of the strategic value of those small states. Especially now we have become quite often talk about Sri Lanka, Mauritius in China. But for Maldives, Sri Lanka in China, but for Mauritius and Seychelles, no one knows where. Most of you do not know where are they and why they are important. And I check all the publications, actually, altogether for papers on Mauritius and Seychelles, less than 5. So I may argue that the problems with all the relation with Mauritius and Seychelles will be the next, will be the future problems or future, topics for China. And what it means for the region and also for other countries in the region. I just use the way of the question mark, will there be a new wave of major country competition because of China's engagement with those countries? I read a lot from the Indian media, Indian publications, because they regard those region, and also those countries as their sphere of influence. China's increasing, outreach to those countries are regarded as a competition against India. So most of those narratives from India are quite negative. I feel very cautious, and including Professor Mohan's book. They use the word rivalry. Usually in China we never use rivalry to describe China-Indian relations. Someone used the word competitor. But rivalry is too strong. In my understanding, to describe China and India. And so I think this informal summit is a good way to address some of the distrust. I published insight with my colleague China. In the essays, you can refer to it to see that how we elaborate this point. And the 4th point is very important. The China-Indian plus. In the Indian media and also the academic circle, there are not much coverage on those China-Indian plus. But in China, we have quite a lot of coverage because we regard it as a breakthrough and may take away of those informal summits. Which means China and India could cooperate in Indian neighborhood, including those 4 small states. Although India have the traditional influence, but China has increasing influence. Why don't we cooperate rather than competing with each other? That's a Chinese thinking. And our 2+ could be in all those countries. And we have proposed a lot on those 2+ mechanism. So I think it still takes time to implement this mechanism. But I think, especially from Chinese perspective, it's very positive. And the second is the old new question about the doubt problems. Will China's economic assistance create more doubt for those recipient countries? That's also very debatable. At least from Chinese perspective, it's not China's fault, or China does not deliberately increase the doubt of those recipient countries. Take Sri Lanka as an example. Sri Lanka sometimes also have a very similar point of view of China on those doubt problems. Thirdly, it's also old narrative of the string of pearls, which was first created by the American academics, but were quite often used by Indians. So China's growing footprints in the Indian Ocean, especially China's port construction, with either Hambantota or Gwadar, or future port constructions will become a real string of pearl? That's always be a question from our international community. And last but not least, will the small state gain by playing one against another? My argument is it will be very dangerous, very risky, very risky. Because now in Southeast Asia, I think we know it quite closely, observe the situation in Southeast Asia. Now, since China and the US compete in this region, become more furious, small states become very uncomfortable in this, big power game. And especially for Singapore, and I think it's the Prime Minister, who attended the Xiangshan Forum yesterday, and just make remarks again that we do not want to, choose side between major countries. I think it's the same for those small states in South Asia and in the Indian Ocean. And someone think, okay, it's good for us because we can play the card between China and India. We can ask China's economic assistance. If China does not give us, we can ask from India, something like that. But it should be very careful, very careful. It's be risky. In my understanding, risky. And for small states, the better to expect a benign relationship or cooperative framework between major countries. If China and India could cooperate more, that will bring the biggest benefit for those small states. Last is some of my concluding thoughts. With BRI 2.0, we call it 2.0 after this year's second BRI summit. We upgrade it. In this BRI 2.0, China will embody a broader framework and comprehensive engagement with small island states in the Indian Ocean. It will be very, very important. And also our expansion will reach, I think, even the West Indian Ocean. And the future computational cooperation will be Madagascar or other countries. And secondly, for China, it's also a quite hot topic in China nowadays to learn about small state diplomacy. In the past, we only know what major countries do, but now small states become very, very critical. And just in the past few weeks, I know, although I'm not in China, but my friends keep sending me information about conferences, workshop. A lot of them are related to small states. How China should understand small states. How China should, put our feet in others' shoes to know more about small states. And in terms of their domestic politics, economic, their legal, so that's very important. China should understand. We can not only from the big powers' money side to understand them. They are different. They have different, tradition, different culture, different way of maneuver. So that's important for China to understand small states to avoid diplomatic risks. We now use diplomatic risks. I'm also working on protecting China overseas national interest. How to, in the promotion and the build of high quality of BRI, how to avoid diplomatic risks is a critical topic, very important. Now many of our projects have faced some risky, either doubt or the domestic politics or even public opinion, NGOs. So, that's very important for China to learn. It's a learning curve. Thirdly, I think China, India would better be cooperate rather than compete in those small states. And I think this year's informal summit, at least from Chinese observation, is quite positive, quite constructive, quite fruitful. And fortunately, we will have the third informal summit in China. I hope our trust could build step by step. Lastly, but not least, if we look to a further picture of the Indian Ocean, I think for countries in the Indian Ocean, especially for US, for India, for Australia, the core of the so-called Indo-Pacific concept. How to engage with China in the framework of Indian Ocean, not to exclude China out of the region. That will be critical. And to accept China's peaceful rights, and to define China properly in the emerging regional architecture will be critical, not only for China, but also for the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ren, for that very informative and insightful presentation. I'm sure we have learned much more about not only about China's foreign policy, but its diplomatic, economic, and military engagement among small states in the Indian Ocean region. You have covered effectively the causes, the process, and the consequences of China's engagement with small states in the region. And in doing so, you have not only enriched our understanding of the geopolitical churning in Indo-Pacific, but also provoked us in many different ways. In one sense, what your presentation basically validates Gramsci's basic notion that power defines geography as much as geography defines power. And you would see that in China's coming out in the Indian Ocean region. And this is not the first time when China did that. As a student of history, the first time China actually actively pursued diplomacy in the Indian Ocean region was 1963-64, and during Xiao Enlai's tours to Western Africa and Indian Ocean region, particularly because they were, because of U.S. movement in the Indian Ocean. But at that point in time, China had no resources to actually effectively put its power to align with its interests, in a sense. You've also underlined, in a sense, some of China's grand strategy, and I'm always kind of very, intrigued by these are initiatives in a sense, but they channelize themselves into the larger grand strategy. And if one looks at the Second World War, Japan's vulnerabilities in terms of, its own trade routes and all that, some of this engagement kind of hops back to some of those vulnerabilities. So China is decreasing its vulnerabilities and exploring new opportunities. So you didn't touch upon it. In a sense, you made this presentation as small states, but I can't help but notice that all of these small states are actually islands in some sense, and islands have both geopolitical and geostrategic, but also geo-operational consequences in terms of when you come to hard military reasoning in engaging these islands. I would now open the floor to take this discussion forward. Ask provocative questions. I think we have, the valid expertise in this room to answer those, but also suggest in ways in which Dr. Ren could improve upon his presentation right now, and take those inputs into his final product for ISAS. So the floor is open. Please introduce yourself briefly.
Mustafa Izzuddin from ISAS. I'd like to join Yogesh by thanking you for a very informative and insightful presentation. I've got 3 questions. I think the first is, one of the problems with small states is its definitional ambiguity. How do you define a small state? And so in the scan that you're doing, and part of it you have shared with us here, what's the definition of small state that you have used, and whether there's a set of criteria that you've used? That's the first question. The second question is, you've talked about China's evolving policy towards the small states in Indian Ocean. How have the small states responded in return to this Chinese evolving policy? And do you see among the case studies that you are going to look at in your scan, whether there are differences in the way they have responded to China's evolving policy? And my final question is, the findings that you have sort of come out for your scan, can these findings be applied to other small states in the way China would respond or would interact or have a policy towards? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mustafa, for your very stimulating questions. I think for small, I will answer it one by one. For small states, I think now it's become very important. If we look at the world now, more than 80% small states in this definition. Usually we can big major power, and the second middle power, and then small states. But my definition not include all the small states. But in terms of their GDP, their political, influence, and even their critical geographic location, we just in different regions we have, representatives of small states. So like these 4 countries. Why I didn't refer to Bangladesh, but Bangladesh too big. It's more middle power. But for Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mauritius, Seychelles, I think both in terms of their location, their their economy, and also that's the Chinese understanding of the critical small states. They are part of this BRI. So I think that's how I define the small states. Some criteria. Of course, I will, in my final scan, I will just give a brief definition of how I see the small states. The second one is very important, how the small states respond to China's engagement. That's very important. I try to do more interviews with those recipient countries, small states. And I talked with Sri Lanka scholars, including Chulani, with him how he perceived China's engagement, and also someone from Maldives. But for Mauritius, Seychelles, I need to go back to China to talk with my students, and because media is not reliable, only read media, you cannot get a clear understanding of the small states' perception of China's engagement. Especially nowadays in Chinese media, we do not have a big coverage of the small states. Because I check the website, I check the internet, all the media coverage on the small states, especially Mauritius, Seychelles, the government statement, or President Xi meet with someone, no other deep analysis. So I think for those countries, it's of course they have different response, especially in terms of their relationship with India. Mauritius, for example, it has around 70% of, I call it immigration, or no, 70 of them are from India. They have so close relationship. So but Seychelles is different. And for Sri Lanka, I think is an ongoing issue. We has a lot of discussion. It's more feasible to get their response. And for Maldives, it's an emerging issue, especially after last year's election. And Maldives' attitude towards China has, some uncertainties. We call it uncertainty, especially the current President Solih, he's quite aggressive towards China. So I think that's part of the reason because of the domestic politics. And thirdly, can I apply this research to other small states? I think in the future, think about it. because in the past I follow more of Southeast Asia, Cambodia, Laos. I cover those countries quite a lot. For China, in China-ASEAN relations, and especially China's reach to small states in Southeast Asia, I think definitely is different from China and those small states in the Indian Ocean. There are many reasons. I won't go into detail, but I think you just help me to make further research in this area. For example, I can make a very detailed or comprehensive comparative studies of China's policy towards small states in different regions in our neighborhood. That will be more insightful. Thank you.
So,
Thank you, Dr. Ren, for an excellent presentation. My name is Iftikhar Chaudhary, by the way, and I'm from Bangladesh. What you raised, Mukesh, that he spoke of the analysis was relevant to small island states. That is true. In fact, if you called it small island states, it would do no damage to analysis. In fact, you're better off calling it small island states because the kind of analysis you made is only relevant to island states. With regard to definition, I think there's a word. Okay, I mean, you could define small states in terms of population, economy, military power, and physical size. As of now, I think the working definition that we employ in the World Bank or United Nations is population. I mean, it's 1.5 to, I think it goes up to 10 million if it's not an island developing states. There is a forum of small states, as you know, which Singapore leads. It's 1 million to 10. Now, there are also small states in the Pacific. My question is, the Pacific small states like Fiji, Nauru, Solomons, Kiribati, is the Chinese policy any different vis-a-vis the small states in the Pacific than in the Indian Ocean? I mean, partly drawing from Mustafa's, I think he also made that point. One difference, of course, is when you are looking at these states, you're looking to India as well, whereas in the Pacific states, you're looking to Australia and the United States. Whether you might see it as a cooperation between India, China, etc., but the small states themselves see it as a competition, obviously, between India and China, even larger states like we do. I mean, sometimes we divide up the cooperation is probably more feasible in larger states like Bangladesh, where sometimes it is said that the economic initiatives are left to China and the political to India, rather than small states which really compete for attention of either China or India. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chaudhary, for your question. I think for the Pacific Islands, small states will become more and more, obvious the China relationship with them, and it has already been quite a lot of discussion. Especially Solomon Island, we all know, recent days we quite discuss about China's one China company leads, one of their islands, and I think if we see the difference, several difference. First, I think geographically, those small island states in the Pacific is different. Since in the picture, most of those China's imports from the Indian Ocean to South China Sea and then go up. For the Solomon, for Fiji, it's far. So in terms of safeguarding slopes, I think small island states in the Indian Ocean is critical. And second, I think for in terms of the importance or strategic importance of small islands in different regions, I believe that's my own understanding. I think the Indian Ocean small state will be more critical. In short term, I think it will be more critical how to handle relations with those small states. For Fiji, Solomon, I think why we are now also still are now growing intention or attention to those small states in Pacific Island because of President Xi's visit. In the single visit, we signed a partnership agreement with 8, small states. But before that, we only signed the partnership agreement with Fiji, no other countries. So we can see a sudden importance of small states, island states, in China's diplomatic layout. And another reason, so I will argue they belong to the future. It's not the current. But for those 4 small states, especially Sri Lanka, Maldives, I think that's a current issue. Thirdly, for small states and Pacific, some of them are related to the issue of Taiwan. China's territorial integrity issue. I think it's a competition between mainland China and the Taiwan Authority, in this area. That's also different. And of course, as you said, that the competitors, or so-called competitors, are different. The Indian Ocean, Indian, very, very important, very critical. How we can handle the relation with India will be critical for China's engagement with those countries. But in the Pacific Island, I think Australia is very cautious. In their foreign policy white paper and their latest speech from their prime minister, very cautious of China's engagement with those island states in the Pacific Ocean. But I could see, you will witness a more frequent China's outreach to the small island states, not only in the Indian Ocean, Pacific, but in other places. Just as I said at the beginning of my presentation, now China will call it so-called major country diplomacy. Now altogether, totally we have established a partnership with 110 countries. We have established diplomatic relations with 180. It's the latest figure. In the October, we have 180 countries with diplomatic relations, and we have 110 with partnership relations. We have some strategic partner, cooperative partner, innovation partner, very different. My new book will be on the partnership diplomacy. And I think in the future we will increase the portfolio, of partnerships, in China's diplomatic layout. And even some other very small island states like Madagascar, I think it will become more important. One more point. If you want to categorize the island states, you see the acceptable categorical name is small island developing states. I see. So you exclude Singapore. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
My name is Christian Wagner. I'm also visiting senior research fellow here at ISAS. I'm from Germany. Ren, thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. Just 2 questions. The one slide where you had the strategic value of the small states. My question was, and you made the categorization. My question would be, is it aim of the Chinese policy to bring all the states in the same category? Or what is the yes, this one. Or what is the priority for China? When you look at the table, you would say it's the sea lanes of communication. Okay, but I'm not sure. So I just want to know: is it the long-term strategy of China to bring all those islands in the same kind of category, or do you say, okay, the Seychelles not so important because they somehow not on the major sea lanes of communication, so we can leave them? Second question would be, when you look at the whole picture from your own assessment, was China's strategy so far successful? Have you been able to achieve your goals in the sense could you build up, or where do you see, let's say, the major problems that you were facing? For instance, in Sri Lanka, when you had a change in government, has it really affected, or is it just a normal business that you say, okay, governments come, governments go, in those countries we have to adapt? So in that sense, from your perspective, is the strategy successful so far? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christian. It's not a prepared question. Yeah, you told me, but it's a good question. I think for this table, and I think it's because just I want to make it coherent to my 4 categories, from slog, political, economic, balancing, and it's the current, the value, the current value for China's outreach to the Indian Ocean. And if we make a table to analyze small island states in the Pacific, it would be different indicators to understand their strategic value. But for why I put it this way, so for Sri Lanka, it's easy to know because of those, either its population or military or especially economic. I think we put the economic cooperation and in a very important position, because economic cooperation is the main impetus for China to cooperate with those small island states. Why China-Sri Lanka relation has got so much attention is because of China's projects in Sri Lanka, and of course because we face some problems there, so there's so many coverages on this. So currently, I think although I have several indicators, criteria, but I think in China's engagement with those small island states, economy will be priority. If we can make money, we can make those projects profitable. That will be good. That will be good. So for some political implications, sea line of communications, I don't think in the next maybe 5-10 years or even longer there will be any problem of the sea line of communication for China. Although in China we talk a lot about Malacca dilemma, but no one expect there will be really a block in the Malacca Strait for China not to import those energies. That will be a third world war. So that's not a dilemma. That's will be a very critical issue. It's a life, our lifeline, on the sea. So for the slogs, I also don't feel that will be very critical in short term. And for balancing, comparatively speaking, I think the effect is not that big. For China to counterbalance the Indo-Pacific concept, India is critical. Because if we always regard India as a weak link in this encirclement of China. If China can have a very good relationship with India, I think the Quad will collapse. The Indo-Pacific strategy will not be effective to contain or to encircle China. So that's why in Chinese academic community, we always make a very clear signal that Indians' Indo-Pacific strategy is different from Americans' Indo-Pacific strategy. To some extent, we exaggerate the differences, the divergence of the Indian and American version of Indo-Pacific. And also, Japan is important. This week we will have our naval joint drill. I think a goodwill drill together. That's the first in the past 8 years. So China-Japan relations are also very, smoothly developed. So we are currently, we are not afraid of worry about the Indo-Pacific strategy. It's because we have these two countries, that we are on the very good track of development. For Australia, I think it's hard. It's hard. It's very close to the United States. But of course, we also understand that those countries play a hedging strategy. It's better for India. Many Chinese believe, try to play the card among different blocks. The first day join the Quad conference. The second day, China, Russia, India. Just play a card. Therefore, I think in terms of balancing, those four countries, they're limited. But probably in the future, that will become more obvious. The second is, those evaluation, whether it's success or it's more pragmatic. I could, just as I said during my presentation, I think nowadays China began to think about the risks in promotion of BRI. So if you compare President Xi's remarks in the first BRI summit with the second BRI summit, it's very different. Very different. In the second one, my main takeaway is to focus more on, limit of the risks. For example, he emphasized, we should have a high quality projects, high quality BRI. Not like the first time, if their project will give them money, but now he emphasized high quality. We narrow the scope of the BRI subjects, BRI projects, and also there are three keywords. One is open, and green, and clean BRI. So high quality from these three dimensions. We should have high quality. Also, we establish the so-called doubt sustainability mechanism. Doubt sustainability framework for participating countries of the BRI. That's also important. It's a direct response to the so-called doubt trap. For the creation of doubt, there are many complicated reasons. But China, we will make good effort, to have a better, improve the doubt of those countries along BRI. Therefore, I think it's a learning curve. Of course, we are facing numerous obstacles or risks or problems. Like just as I said, that the domestic politics is very complicated. So many countries along the BRI, probably at least in the South Asian countries, are so diversified. So how to understand their domestic politics, how to try to be neutral, not involved into their domestic politics, not to be played during their election. That's critical. So we are not that naive, to believe some candidate will be on China's side. It's very, complicated for other countries' domestic politics. Like this year's Sri Lanka election, I think we are cautiously observe. Even the media always said, okay, got a buyer, if he get elected, he will be very close to China. But I think we are cautious. We don't be so sure, which one will be better for China. So do not make mistakes. Keep out of the political issues. That's a lesson we also need to learn. And there's just one point I would add. Now when we engage with those countries, we have some smart ways. For example, I talked with Dr. Chaudhary, our ambassador to Bangladesh, is not a professional diplomat. He worked in the Guangdong provincial government for quite a long time. All his career is in Guangdong. He never worked in the China Foreign Ministry, but he directly assigned, sent by the Foreign Ministry to become an ambassador to Bangladesh, and the current not Guangdong, it's Yunnan province, the Bangladesh. He's a director of foreign affairs of the Yunnan provincial government. And China's ambassador to Sri Lanka is also very, very, special. He's not from the Chinese MFA. He's from Guangdong. We call it the something like the overseas association of the overseas Chinese, something like that. He's not. All his career is in Guangdong. He never sent out to the embassies, never be official in the foreign ministry. But now he has become an ambassador to Sri Lanka since last year. Some observations are, okay, why send him? Because he has very good skill of, get relationship with different shareholders. His work in Guangdong is to some extent it's a united front, to get as much as we can on our side. So we send him to Sri Lanka. I think it's also want him to use his skill to maintain a balance among different stakeholders in Sri Lanka or in other countries. So you can see this small change just reflects China's changing diplomatic mindset and different ways to reach to foreign countries. So that's I would say it's a learning curve. It takes time. So I totally understand the complaints, the criticism from outside, but I hope we can improve it as soon as possible. Not take too long. Take too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. My name is Vipinda. I'm a student here. Thanks to Andre. That's a very interesting perspective. And I just want to pick on one point you raised in response to Kristen's question. And that is, there's a wish that profitability or viability, economic viability of these projects is going to improve in the future. So we've heard reports of, on the Central Asia network as well. Few of the projects are turning out to be bordering on white elephants, and that, of course, became very evident with Hambantota and Sri Lanka. My question relates to the thinking in Beijing amongst the entities that are financing these projects. So is it the commercial banks? Is it purely the state? At some point, the banks are going to ask for some bang for the buck, right? It's not a bottomless pit, and at a time when there's already economic stress. Is there a cutback? And when you mentioned President Xi's second address, is part of it that the economic considerations are assuming greater importance than the strategic? And how much of an overlap is there between the two? The second question is an aside, just feel free to ignore it. You often hear of parallels drawn with the Marshall Plan in reconstruction of post-World War Europe. I've always been a bit baffled personally about, I don't see much of analogy, but I'm wondering if you'd like to share your thoughts on that. Do you see parallels between the Marshall Plan and the BRI?
Thank you, Pinder. I think I can only share with you thinking in my mind, not thinking in Beijing. I don't know what the people in Beijing think about it. And for the first question about the banks, or strategic or economic benefit, actually in China, it's also a lot of debate whether the BI is pure economic, it's a strategic. political implications. I think I belong to the group who believe BI should be pure, or at least most of BI should be economic, if not. Because if you read some government document after 2013, we always emphasize BI is a platform for economic cooperation. China just provides public goods. Other countries, you can all use these public goods to make economic benefit. So I think economic cooperation, economic engagement, and economic benefit, until now, it's still a big, objective or reason for trying to promote BI. Of course, since there are more and more countries join BI, and its extension to different continents, many people believe it's a geostrategic chessboard. We have some strategic implications or strategic obligations. Of course, honestly speaking, in my understanding, I think now our assets, our investment, are globally. In different countries, we have so many investments. And we call it overseas China, overseas China. It's about, I'll give you the figure, it's about, it's almost 1 trillion, or even more than that, Chinese overseas assets. 1.3, I think it's 1.3. There are more than 5,000 US companies go overseas for these projects. Last year, there are 145 Chinese citizens, Chinese people go abroad. How to protect them? Protect the money, protect the company, protect the people. We must, expand our interest. For example, while we send the PLA Navy to the Indian Ocean, one of the reasons is, for anti-piracy, to safeguard the slug. Therefore, it's become now in China, because I'm running this research center on protecting China's overseas interest. It's become very, very critical for China to learn to know how to protect. Because we will have a different way to protect, not the US way. It's not going to work. Because if you read our latest defense white paper, we clearly elaborate that our military is pure defensive. Self-defense. We cannot send our PLA overseas to protect those facilities, especially in the short term. And although there are some suspicion about China's, build-up of more ports for military use, but I don't think so. At least in the short term, it's impossible. We only have the Djibouti, we call it some support port, something like that. Support base. It's more for support. It's not for power projection. We not to fight a combat overseas. So if we cannot use PLA, what can we use? That's why in China I work with a lot of companies. They want to go overseas. Now the Chinese government encourages them to go overseas to make it more commercial way to protect the interest. If every problem should be handled by the government, the embassy will stuck. Will be, can do nothing. There are so many people, so many projects. So the government prefer to use the market power, to use the commercial way, and to protect the interest. That is what I know, and what I'm doing now, to help those going overseas companies to know more about the country, the risks, how to protect, how to use the international standard to protect. To make a very careful balance, not to interfere into others' domestic politics, but also you can protect the interest. And for the banks, I think AIIB, I didn't mention during my presentation. AIIB is very important for the future promotion of BRI. I think one of those concerns from outside, from other countries, okay, AIIB is initiated by China, AIIB will only serve China's interest. It's China's bank. So how to make AIIB work for not only for Chinese projects, but for other projects? Make it more international public goods. To when money invest in those products, I think will be critical. That will be critical. And so that's probably my answer to the first question. The Marshall Plan, that's a long story, and I will not go into details. I will send you an article which our Vice Foreign Minister Le Yucheng was interviewed by Financial Times. The first question the Financial Times asked him is whether BI is a Marshall Plan. He very clearly, answered this question. Very long. I have this, so I won't need to read it. Yeah, read it. So I can share with you later. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, please.
Just now you mentioned that China is pretty new player in this region. So I just want to understand how the other major players have responded to the increased engagement by China. Yeah. Do they have any counter policies, for instance? Yeah.
Yes, I think from the Chinese, thank you for the question. I think from Chinese perspective, of course, the major countries have some counter policies against China. And for example, India, has done a lot to enhance the relationship with the neighborhood. And according to many Chinese, we believe, because in the 2015 election in Sri Lanka, actually the current president, Samarasi, I think he's more close to India. Many Chinese believe his winning of the election, India is behind, support him to win. And China, of course, we preferred other candidates. For this upcoming election, and Maya Mandasa, I think the media describe him as a black house. Probably he has a chance to beat Gotabaya, and Gotabaya is being regarded as pro-China, like his brother, Mashida. So I think big powers are behind. We have our own interest, and especially for China's growing interest, India is very cautious observe. So from last year until this year, Modi has met with the leaders of all those four countries to upgrade our relations, and to some extent, Chinese understanding is to counterbalance against China. And but China has confidence because we have money. That most of Chinese believe. India can say good words, but have no money to support them. Like the Hambantota, that's the Sri Lanka government invite us to invest because they asked the Indian first, but India could not do it, and then the China. So what we do not worry about this election issue is China have a confidence. No matter who get the power, for those small island countries, their policy, main policy will be concentrate on development. Who can help them to develop? China. So, if you take the Sri Lanka as a case, after the election in 2015, we have some time of worry about whether the new government will alienate from China and get closer to India, just as it, in the election time what is said. But at last, these past 2 years, we can see the return of this relationship between China and Sri Lanka. So I think China-India is one of our concern, and another, of course, U.S. And U.S. also speed up its enrichment with those countries, especially Sri Lanka, and Maldives, and also include Maldives. So I think it's now China, we watch closely. We are trying not to stir up the major country conflict or contest in those countries. And also, just as I said in the concluding remarks, I think for the small countries, small island countries, they had better not to expect the major country competition. And I think that will be do no good to their interest.
Any other questions? No. I have a few of my own, but before doing that, let me just say that the questions which have been put to you so far. I think if you ever wish to write a book, I guess you have the chapters in line in a sense if you take all those questions together. So that has been a really provocative discussion so far. Just some minor points in a sense. One of them is that you define China's BRI in some sense as providing public goods. But public goods can't sustain without policing. At some point in time, you have to sustain those public goods, and therefore, you would have to police them. So there's obviously a military component to it, or a constabulary component to it, which China can't avoid. In some sense, if you want to continue that path, and that brings, in a sense, its own complications. That dovetails into your arguments about military to military cooperation as a part of it, and therefore I'm particularly interested in how much PLA is a part of this diplomatic initiative, PLA Navy as such, because it's an important component in a sense when you see, the idea of IOR and small states taking hold within the Chinese mindset now. There are certain bureaucracies, there are certain organizations which also become much more pivotal in those decisions. But let me also kind of take the bull by the horns and to ask you in a sense that there are three major concerns around BRI. And you mentioned a few of them, you explained on a few of them. One is lack of transparency. You don't know what the agreement really is between, and the Maldives episode was very illustrative of it. I think Maldives still owes something like $30 billion to China, but nobody knew exactly the extent of those dealings. The second point is about domestic political subversion. And this is as much a problem for India as it is for China, and you eloquently illustrated about it. You can't really, you at some point in time, you need to have, whether you like it or not, has to bet on a particular horse. And that is a major complication, how you deal with it. And the caution which you mentioned in your own, presentation, the recent caution in China is a part of experiencing those complications in a sense and internalizing those. And lastly is also about, in some sense, the larger problem for India. And you mentioned India's critical pivotal role, but the larger problem for India is about balancing China. This is not a game for absolute gains. This is a game for relative gains. And China is already far ahead. And when you look about this intense play of looking over who is gaining relatively more, I think there's very little incentive for India actually to get into that mode of cooperation with China. And these are just some thoughts, in a sense that which would provoke some more ideas from your side, not necessarily as if you have to answer. But having said that, this this has been an excellent presentation, and I have learned, and I'm sure all of us have learned a lot from this excellent presentation, mainly because I see that most of the times we learn about China's policies from the outside, of what we think China's policies are, rather than having an insider account of what China is doing. And it kind of clarifies a lot of misperceptions, a lot of misunderstandings, but also provides us a platform to share our common concerns, in a sense. So thank you so much for doing this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Sure.